This video is brought to you by Nebula. Ethiopia has found itself in disputes with its neighbour Somalia and regional power Egypt, with tensions on the Horn of Africa reaching new heights. In fact, Ethiopia's push for access to the sea and economic development through a massive dam project has seemingly provoked the creation of a burgeoning Anti-Ethiopia alliance, with Somalia and Egypt inking a new military pact which could see Egyptian troops deployed to Somalia, much to the anger of Ethiopia. So in this video, we're going to explain why Ethiopia is at odds with the two countries, why tensions are approaching a fresh peak, and discuss the prospect of a new conflict. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So to start with, we're going to explain the tensions that have flared between Ethiopia and Somalia since the beginning of this year. In January, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Somaliland, a self-governing but unrecognized breakaway republic that declared independence from Somalia in 1991. The deal would see Somaliland lease 20 miles of coastline to landlocked Ethiopia and access to the port of Berbera for commercial and military purposes. In exchange, the deal would reportedly see Ethiopia recognize Somaliland as a sovereign country. Now, these would be pretty major developments. For Ethiopia, it would mark the restoration of access to the sea, which was lost after Eritrea won its independence in the early 90s. For Somaliland, it would be the first time a UN member state had recognized its sovereignty. But the Memorandum of Understanding was met with a furious reaction from Somalia, which obviously doesn't recognize Somaliland's independence. The Somali government described it as an illegal act of aggression, declared the deal null and void, vowed to block the deal, recalled its ambassador from Ethiopia, and denied air traffic clearance for an Ethiopian Airlines flight carrying an Ethiopian delegation to Somaliland. So tensions were running high between Ethiopia and Somalia when regional power Egypt stepped in support of Somalia, with Egypt's President Sisi saying no one will agree to Ethiopia's move and that Egypt would provide support in case of aggression against one of the Arab countries, especially when brotherly countries ask us to stand by them. Now, this is far from the first time that Egypt and Ethiopia have been on the opposite sides of a tense dispute relating to Ethiopia's unilateral actions. In fact, since 2011, the two countries have been at odds over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD, a massive hydroelectric dam built by Ethiopia on the Blue Nile River, a tributary of the Nile River that flows through Sudan and Egypt before reaching the sea. The multi-billion-dollar GERD has already started generating electricity, and the overall project is more than 95% complete, with it holding the potential to double Ethiopia's electricity generation. So Ethiopia unsurprisingly views the project as crucial to the development of the country. However, Egypt, for whom the Nile is its lifeblood, sees the dam as a major threat, fearing disruptions and restrictions on its own water supply, and as such has been vocal in its opposition, warning that it will defend and protect the rights and interests of the Egyptian people, in accordance with the UN Charter. In fact, back in 2021, Egypt wrote to the UN Security Council saying that Ethiopia's intransigence and unilateralism over the dam could have serious ramifications that threaten peace and security throughout the region, a clear hint that the dispute risked escalating into a conflict. So anyway, the buddying up between Egypt and Somalia isn't exactly surprising, and could present a burgeoning anti-Ethiopia alliance, which appeared to become even clearer in August, when Egypt and Somalia signed a security pact, viewed by some as an attempt to settle scores against Ethiopia. Then last week, Somalia received a delivery of weaponry and ammunition from Egypt, Egypt's first military aid package to Somalia in more than 4 decades. In another first, Egypt will also reportedly contribute troops to the new African Union-led stabilization mission in Somalia, after the current one wraps up at the end of the year. Meanwhile, Somalia says Ethiopian troops, of which there are a few thousand as part of the current mission, will not form part of the new mission if Ethiopia doesn't scrap its deal with Somaliland. So effectively, Ethiopian troops would be kicked out and replaced by Egyptian ones, who would be operating in a country bordering Ethiopia, much to Ethiopia's chagrin. In fact, Ethiopia's foreign ministry accused Somalia of colluding with external actors, aiming to destabilize the region, adding that it cannot stand idle while this happens. Now, we can expect tensions to rise further as reports emerge that Egyptian and Somali militaries will hold joint exercises in Somalia this month. So, with these tensions looming over the already troubled Horn of Africa region, are there any efforts to cool things down? Well, yes, there have been, and in fact still are. For example, Turkey, which is itself vying for increased regional influence, has involved itself by leading indirect talks between Somalia and Ethiopia, in the hopes of resolving the Somaliland port dispute. These have borne no fruit so far, and since the second and latest round of indirect talks, Somalia signed its military agreement with Egypt, which only further inflamed tensions. Additionally, Djibouti, the small but geostrategically important neighbour of both Ethiopia and Somalia, has sought to defuse the situation by offering Ethiopia exclusive access to one of its ports. Djibouti, aside from naturally fearing regional conflicts, is also keenly aware that Ethiopia's access to the Somaliland coast could damage Djibouti's highly port-dependent economy, with an estimated 95% of Ethiopia's trade passing through Djibouti's port. As for the dispute over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, attempts at reaching some kind of friendly agreement between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt over the Nile's water flow have also basically failed, with Egypt accusing Ethiopia of indefinitely prolonging the cover of negotiations in order to solidify the status quo, i.e., Ethiopia's completion of a now largely functional dam. The challenge of resolving any of the disputes we discussed in this video are that they are all tied into the ideas of national sovereignty and survival, with competition between countries treated as a zero-sum game. For example, Ethiopia's right to pursue modernization and economic development versus the cruciality of the Nile's water supply to Egypt, or Ethiopia's push for sea access versus Somalia's territorial integrity. But what are the prospects that this war of words escalates into some kind of actual conflict? Well, it would require a big escalation, but the disputes are evidently already taking on military overtones, with the future possibility of Egyptian troops in Somalia meeting Ethiopian troops along the border. Some Horn of Africa analysts warn that there is a risk that a confrontation could lead to a low-scale interstate conflict, though another says that the risk of a direct shooting war is low, but a proxy conflict is possible. In any case, the region, currently afflicted by a major war in Sudan, regional rebellions in Ethiopia, and a long-running insurgency in Somalia, really can't afford another conflict. Before you go, we have an exciting announcement, which I'd love to show you now. Look, as British people, we often cast a wary eye at our friends across the Atlantic. But honestly, the last few months have been especially wild. We've seen Biden bail from the race after a terrible debate.
My fellow Americans.
The red-blue divide making way for lurid green. Trump accusing Kamala of changing her race. Vance getting accused of couches. Endless memes about coconut trees, and endless arguments over crowd sizes.
This weird obsession with crowd sizes.
Obama making a joke, Trump talking about Biden like an ex he misses, RFK Jr. potentially having worms in his brain, before admitting to burying a bear in Central Park. Oh, and an assassination attempt that we all kind of forgot about because of all of the other chaos. I mean, honestly, WTF USA. The thing is though, while it might be tempting to just roll your eyes at these shenanigans, these aren't just meme-worthy moments. And you know I'm serious, because I've not stood up in a video since COVID. But these incidents actually pose important questions, like how much does the Gen Z vote matter this time round? How important will online campaigning and social media prove to be? What impact do running mates have? Okay, I don't have words for that one. These are the kinds of things we'll be explaining in our new Nebula original series, What to Follow USA, only on Nebula. Each week, we'll take the moments that have been dominating internet discourse and explaining the true politics under the hood. Look at me pandering to the American audience. We'll be releasing new episodes of What to Follow every Friday through to the election. The fact that it's on Nebula means we've been able to take more risks with this series. The tone and attitude of the show isn't what you'd expect from TLDR. I'm not sure we've talked about fucking couches on YouTube before, but the journalism and reporting is exactly the standard you'd expect. Nebula support also means that we can do things differently, create additional content for you, and tackle topics that the YouTube algorithm just wouldn't normally allow for. It's not just this new series on Nebula either though. There's also incredible originals on the platform like Modern Conflicts from Real Life Law, or the upcoming documentary from Tom Nicholas, Boomers, which takes a provocative look at the lives and legacy of the baby boom generation. Plus, we also post all of our normal content on Nebula ad-free, and often before it ends up on YouTube. If you want to check all of that out, plus WTF USA, then head to go.nebula.tv/WTF, or click the link in the description. That way, you can pick up an annual Nebula subscription for a huge 40% off. We're really happy with how this new series has turned out, so please do give the series a look. We'd really appreciate it.